Wow, thank you so much. I'm going to talk about blockchains and what they do differently compared to what we've done before, and of course, what can we use them for, and how this can help fight corruption and poverty. And even where you can get a blockchain for Christmas for your kids. Well, maybe not, but we'll see about that because, well, blockchains are sort of abstract. So we'll start with something much more concrete, which is my friend Jen from the Philippines. Jen moved to Denmark to work, and every month she sends money home to her sister, who still lives in the Philippines. Unfortunately, sending money across borders to developing countries costs an average of 9% in transaction fees. And 9%, that can mean a lot to you when you live in a poor environment. So 5 years ago, I moved to the Philippines to change this. We started a company to make money transfers cheaper, and we managed to get the cost down from about 9% to just about 2%. So that was a good improvement. But how did we do this? Well, instead of trusting in banks and money transfer services and other middlemen to move money into the Philippines, we instead trusted in blockchain technology to move value across borders. And let's talk a little bit about trust, because this is how we do trust today. We trust in legal, financial, and political institutions that are often slow, expensive, and they're only accessible to people living in certain parts of the world. Blockchains are digitizing trust. Blockchains are making trust free, efficient, and even accessible to the billions of people that are living in countries that do not have trusted institutions today. In those cases where blockchains are removing the need for middlemen, you can even say that blockchains are making trust obsolete. So, what is a blockchain? A blockchain is actually sort of a world computer that we can compare to the personal computers that we use every day. On our personal computers, we can install applications, we can run applications, and they run pretty fast. That's great. Unfortunately, our personal computers can also easily have downtime if the hardware breaks or we lose power. And it's hard to trust our personal computers because they can get infected by virus or they can get attacked by hackers. A blockchain is a world computer consisting of tens of thousands of personal computers that run an application that connects the personal computer to the global world computer network. In the world computer, we can also run applications. When we do so, the application is executed at each of these individual computers. So if there's 10,000 computers in the network, our application will execute 10,000 times over. You can imagine if we need to execute the same application 10,000 times over, it's not necessarily very fast. So at least with the current blockchain implementations, you cannot run the latest 3D video game on a blockchain world computer. That would be too expensive and too slow. But we get something else. We get no downtime, because even if 1,000 of the individual computers break down, the remaining 9,000 computers in the network will keep on running your application and giving you your result. And most importantly, there's no longer a need for trusting the hardware that we run our applications on. Because even if 1,000 of the individual computers in the network get infected by virus or get attacked by hackers, the remaining 9,000 computers in the network will keep on running your application and giving you the correct result. Because the way that consensus is achieved in the world computer is that the majority of computing power decides which is the correct way to execute your application. And this was a breakthrough, not just in financial transactions, but in something more fundamental, in something like computer science, because for the first time we could run applications in a global network where we could not trust any single part of the network. We could not trust any single computer in the network. But in aggregate, by combining them, we can now trust the sum of their computations. Or even better, we don't need to trust it. We know it's correct. So what's the current state of blockchains? As you probably know, the cryptocurrencies exploded last year in prices. And now we've been through a bit of a correction this year. So at the beginning of 2017, the market capitalization of these crypto assets was about $18 billion. Now it's still around $200 billion, even after the correction. So this means there's now about 10 times as much money in this space being invested, and that entrepreneurs can use for building and innovating on new products and services. So whenever we see new technologies developing, we're often observing what are called these S-curves. So what we just went through in 2017 was one S-curve where blockchains were picking up steam and speed. We're now at the top of one S-curve. People are innovating, people are building and building and building, introducing new products and services. And at some point, we will find the next S-curve and we will keep on growing and bringing adoption of blockchain technologies. And also something like just the amount of venture capital that is being put into this space also keeps growing. Even the famous Yale Investment Fund, the University of Yale, is investing heavily in crypto-based activities. But of course, the most important statistic for how this is really growing is that there are now more Google searches for Bitcoin than for Justin Bieber. And of course, I'm joking here, but only half joking, because it does show that the attention this is getting is just growing and growing. And at least it was a very big day in the Bitcoin community when Bitcoin became bigger than Bieber. So what are some of the current themes in blockchain development? What's going on right now? And I'll show you two cases and then one more futuristic case in the end. But a major theme right now is tokenization of everything. When we today buy or sell a house, we record the transaction in a centralized government registry. And in our part of the world, it works okay, but it's still expensive. In some parts of the world, it doesn't work at all. But we can tokenize ownerships of houses by taking the deed of the house and representing it by a token on a blockchain. And whenever we buy or sell a house, we will then transfer ownership of the token on the blockchain as well, to verify and signify the transaction has been completed. But it's not just in houses. We can do this in anything we can represent in a digital format. So company stocks, bonds, loans, gold, commodities, intellectual property, pretty much anything. And now that we can do this with blockchains, it can be done so efficiently and so automized that we can do it much, much cheaper. And we can do it in stuff where it would make no sense to do before, where we had to pay a central government registry to do it. So the next time when you buy a phone or a watch, you might get a blockchain token that signifies your ownership of this watch. And when you then sell the watch on eBay a few years later, the buyer will probably demand to see that you also own this blockchain token to show that you are not selling a stolen watch. And so this can very efficiently fight trading in stolen goods on a global scale. And it's just applying what we've been done in expensive stuff like houses to everything else made possible by blockchains. But in supply chain and trade finance, we can also use these tokenization trends by tokenizing what in the shipping industry is called the bill of lading. Whenever a case of apples or anything else moves from the producer in one country to the land transportation, to the shipping company, to the recipient in the recipient country, every time it changes hands, it needs another few pages of documentation. And today, it's about 70 pages of A4 pages that needs to be documented every time a case of apples moves across the world. We can tokenize this bill of lading, and by doing so, we can very efficiently track every time a good changes hands in the supply chain, and if this case of apples get infected, we can very efficiently discover where was this made possible, where did it get infected. And in fact, that's exactly what Maersk and IBM are doing. And what Maersk found was that they can now save 20% of their costs by doing away with the 70 pages of A4 documentation that they do every time they move a good, and instead replacing it by a blockchain token. And when Barclays, the British bank, did a similar demo, they found that they could now pay suppliers in 4 hours instead of the suppliers having to wait 20 days. And even companies like Walmart are now requiring their lettuce and spinach suppliers to track their deliveries on blockchains to facilitate much more efficient supply chain management and to discover if anything and where anything might go wrong. So that's going to bring huge cost savings in these businesses. And now that we're talking about tokenization, an obvious thing we also need to tokenize is, of course, currencies. And so far, the currencies that have been tokenized have been these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether. And they've been under a lot of fire. They've been said to be nothing but tulip bubbles and that they have no real use. I think that is false, because actually these currencies are like stamps. A stamp is just a piece of paper, which does not have any value in itself, but because we can use a stamp to send a letter, the stamp becomes useful and valuable. And it's the same with these cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Ether. Anytime you need to make a transaction or run an application in the blockchain world computer, you need to pay a small fee. And this fee can only be paid in a cryptocurrency such as Bitcoin or Ether. It cannot be paid in dollars or euros. So this creates a demand for these cryptocurrencies, and it gives them value and something useful to them. Now, of course, the current price and the current market cap of these cryptocurrencies is also a lot of speculation. But at the core, I think it's important to realize that there is a real use and a real value at the core. Now, one of the problems of these cryptocurrencies have, of course, been their very large volatility, their instability of their price. So that's why we are now seeing a lot of developments into stable coins, which are coins that are stable in value relative to a dollar or a euro, for instance. And companies like Tether and the Scandinavian company Arise are doing exactly that. They're holding dollars or euros in their bank accounts, and then they're issuing tokens on a blockchain that represents $1 or €1 that you can redeem the physical dollar for with the company. Now, one challenge with this model is, of course, what happens if one of these companies go bankrupt or get shut down? Does your token still have any value? That's why I think we'll eventually see central banks issuing their own national currencies as digital tokens on blockchains. And in fact, in Singapore, in Canada, and I think even the Swedish central bank is looking into whether this is to be done on blockchains. And I think it'll happen eventually. But perhaps even more interestingly, there are now big developments towards decentralized stablecoins. And what they essentially do, projects like Maker and Basis, is that they are implementing central banks as decentralized applications that run on a blockchain. So you could say they are creating decentralized central banks, which sounds like an incredible paradox, but it's more or less what they're doing. But for instance, in the case of Maker, you have probably heard that in the old days, the dollar was backed by gold. You could take your dollar and go to the central bank in the US and you could get a gram of gold. Maker is doing this, but they're doing it on the blockchain. So Maker is issuing a stable coin called DAI, which is worth $1. And if the value of this DAI goes too far away from $1, then you can return the DAI to the decentralized central bank running on the blockchain, and you will get cryptographic assets in return. So the DAI is backed by tokenized assets. And this collateral, these tokenized assets, it can be Bitcoin and Ether, it can be tokenized stocks, tokenized bonds, tokenized gold, tokenized real estate, pretty much anything. Oh, and the most interesting thing with this is that before we had to trust, central banks, politicians, whoever enacts the monetary policies of a country, we had to trust that they would be doing a good job. But now, when these decentralized central banks get established, everyone can verify and audit directly on the blockchain that they do have the assets backing this stable coin. So that's a level of transparency we've never seen before in the financial system. And big investment companies like Andreessen Horowitz and Bain Capital have invested hundreds of millions of dollars in this space. So I think one of them will succeed, and it's going to be incredibly interesting. What kind of role is left for central banks if one of these projects can create a completely auditable and verifiable decentralized alternative? And a stable coin is really the key piece of infrastructure we need for enabling many of the promises of blockchains. For instance, in getting paid and doing your retail payments using blockchain technology. It doesn't make a lot of sense to get your salary as Bitcoin if the value of your salary can be half in a month, so you cannot afford your rent. And it doesn't make a lot of sense to take a loan in Bitcoin if the value of the loan can be 10 times as much in a year, so you might owe 10 times as much in a year. So these markets are now coming to blockchains. And just debt. Debt is the largest financial market in the world. $200 trillion now getting ready for coming onto the blockchain. And also this is just enabling the financial inclusion of the 2 billion people who do not have bank accounts today. Now with this, with a good stablecoin, they can get financial security in something that is of stable value. And they can access financial services from all over the world just by using a simple smartphone, or even a dumb phone, as long as it can send and receive SMS. The impact that we will see when 2 billion people join the global economy for the first time, I think that is just going to be incredible. All right, so let's take a step into the future for my last application here. But no further into the future than driverless cars, which we know will be here in a few years. But really, any kind of robot, any kind of self-driving car or vacuum cleaning robot or any kind of other robot is going to be helped here. Because today, if I took my vacuum cleaning robot into the bank of Nordea and asked them, please create a bank account for my vacuum cleaner robot, I think the bank would probably laugh at me. I need to do that experiment one day. It's almost like, well, today only people and companies can get bank accounts, right? It's almost as if we're treating robots as second-class citizens by discriminating against them and not allowing them to get bank accounts. And maybe in the future we'll need to look over our shoulders when they discover this and get more intelligent. Or maybe blockchains will save us from the robot revenge, because on a blockchain, anything and any person and anything can get a blockchain money account. So in a few years, when you as a passenger step into a driverless taxi, perhaps the taxi is not owned by a taxi company or by Uber. Perhaps the taxi is sort of self-owning. At least the taxi has its own blockchain money account inside the computer that only the car itself can access, in the computer that is inside the car. And so when you get inside the car as a passenger and you pay for your ride, you pay into the blockchain money account of the car itself that only the car can access. And then with this money, the car can go to a charging station and pay for its own recharging. With this money, the car can go to a mechanic and pay for repairs if it breaks the windshield. After a year, maybe the car has made a nice profit. Then the car can go to a car dealership and buy a second car, and then copy its own software into this second car, which can now work as an employee of the first car, or maybe the second car is its own independent entrepreneur, trying to make a profit and replicate into even more cars. This sounds far out, but what we did was just that we took two technologies that we know are coming: blockchains and driverless cars. And by combining them, something like this becomes possible. And it's not just cars, it's also the solar panels on the roof, which can now sell the power that it produces. It's the drone delivering packages. It's even the coffee vending machine in the hallway. Any kind of thing connected to the Internet of Things can now not just communicate with each other, but also pay each other for goods and services. So normally we talk about financial inclusion of people in developing countries. But this is financial inclusion of AI, and I think that's also very important. And when you realize that Gartner estimates that in a few years, 50 billion machines will be connected to the Internet of Things, then you also realize that the biggest consumer group in financial services will not be people, it will be machines. And if you're in financial services, I think that's just incredibly interesting. And it also brings us very interesting and weird questions like, if a driverless taxi that is self-owning makes a mistake and drives into your house, who do you sue? Do you sue the robot? It's a weird question, but these are the types of questions I think we will need to start asking and answering sooner than we expect. So, today, we trust in financial and legal and political institutions that rely on human moral integrity and the ability to avoid human errors. But now we're entering a time where these relations between humans and companies and AIs can now be defined and enforced using the blockchain world computer instead, by digitizing trust, or even in some cases making trust obsolete. And if you are in an organization today that has trust as part of your offering, then I think you'll most likely be affected by blockchains in some way. And whether it's by making money transfers to the Philippines more efficient, or it's by creating a publicly auditable, decentralized central bank for everyone in the world, including the unbanked, blockchains are spurring wealth creation, cooperation, and legal and political transparency in a way we have never seen before. In other words, blockchains provide us with an opportunity to address some of humanity's most difficult problems, if we will it. So, thanks a lot.